Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we got a super special video today. Ixalan is about to release. We had the pre-release last weekend, full release coming Friday. So today we're going to talk about the top 10 Ixalan cards for the standard format, and joining me to break this down, like usual, is Chaz. How's it going today, Chaz?
How's it going, Seth? Avast, yar, me mateys. Let's talk about some dinosaurs and pirates and all this awesome stuff.
So before we get into the individual cards, the top 10 list, what do you feel about this set in general? Like, we're having a rotation, format's going to be new. How much of an impact do you think we should expect from Ixalan cards for the short-term future, the next couple months or so?
I think it's going to have a pretty fairly big impact, Seth. I mean, we're losing a lot of cards and a lot of sets. We're losing 2 blocks, and we're basically only replacing it with 1 set. So I think just by default, Ixalan is going to have some cards pushed to the forefront. A lot of them will play complementary roles pretty much probably early on as folks kind of understand what is good, what's not working, what's not utilized and overshadowed so far. So as people are figuring things out, it will still have an impact, but it might play a complementary role. And then as more people figure out more cards, it will definitely be pushed to the forefront because it really has to.
Yeah, I mean, by default, just having so many fewer cards in the format, it definitely helps the set's odds. I do think, like you said, I think it's unlikely that this has a Kaladesh-ian impact where, like, immediately there were energy decks, there were Aetherworks Marvel decks. There's no one parasitic mechanic that really pushes just a one-set block only deck to the top of the format. I don't think. We have the tribes, but I mean, there's a chance we see, like, Dinosaur Tribal right away. That's probably the most likely. Maybe Pirates. But I think for the most part, the tribes will be strengthened a lot once we get to the second set. So I think you're right. Until we get to Rivals of Ixalan, I expect that we'll start off seeing the cards that are just really good standalone cards showing up with the cards from Amonkhet, with the cards from Kaladesh block. Because the set does have some really strong cards that you don't really need to build around. They're just good on their own and can show up in a lot of different places.
Yeah, certainly. It has some great one-off cards, and I do believe Dinosaurs and Pirates can make it. Those two definitely felt like the stronger of the tribes that were introduced in Ixalan. Vampires feels like it needs a little bit more, and Merfolk, from what I've seen, I mean, it's hard to say this, but it felt like almost a draft deck. So there's a huge disparity between the tribes. But I do feel Dinosaurs and Pirates, at least early on, can certainly get there.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because I would expect them to, I think they can be decks, whether they can really break into tier 1, they might be like tier 2, but then I expect they'll get a boost of power with the winter set, and that's when we'll see a lot of these tribes really come into their own and be maybe some of the better decks in the standard format. So it's kind of exciting to see how things shake out. Anyway, let's jump into our top 10 list, and coming in at number 10, Chaz, you just had to sneak this one onto the list, Jayce Cunning Castaway. Chaz, why don't you tell us what you like about the new Jayce?
Well, it's 3 mana, right? So by default, it has to be on there. And this is me advocating for a blue card. I mean, this is unheard of.
That's true.
I saw enough in Jayce to say it may not be on the same power level as, say, a Liliana the Last Hope or even some other 3-drop planeswalkers that we saw in the past. But it does a serviceable job of gaining you card advantage. It still plays really well with Heart of Kiran, which is still in the format. All 3 mana walkers play very well with that card. And it fits into a tribe that it's just on the cusp of what we were talking about. There's enough evasive creatures that have flying. You look at some of the 1/2 Brain Maggot pirate. The name escapes me right now. You have the pirate from Aether Revolt, the Plunderer, that can work well with counters. So there's a lot of different synergy with evasive creatures. You have Heart of Kiran. Maybe that's a deck in and of itself. There's Favorable Winds, a card that you really like, Seth. And there's a lot of cards that can build around that. Jayce always plays a good support role in that as well. So I think there's a lot of different archetypes that can utilize Jayce, and it's not totally bad.
Yeah, I think I'm coming around on Jayce a little bit. I don't think Jayce is one of the more busted 3-mana planeswalkers we've seen, but like you said, 3-mana planeswalkers, they always tend to be better than we expect them to be. They usually end up being playable, and I think Jayce definitely got better as Ixalan went along. When it first came out, it's like, oh, what are you going to do with this? But as you pointed out, lots of evasive pirates, the favorable winds, 1/1 flyers. So there is a lot of ways to take advantage of the loot mode. And then making creatures is always fine. And the ultimate actually seems weirdly powerful. And it's not that unreachable. You mentioned Skyship Plunderer, which makes it a lot faster. Like a curve of Siren Stormcaller into Skyship Plunderer, into Jayce. You get to loot, you proliferate essentially another counter onto Jayce, you're almost to the ultimate already, and then even if you just make 3 tokens, that's a lot of value you're getting from your Jayces. So I think that after seeing all of Ixalan, I think there's a better chance that we see Jayce, because it does seem to support some of the more interesting cards from the set really well.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate again, Jayce and Heart of Kiran work really well with the +1, then taking, even if you're not building towards the ultimate, you have a 4/4 flyer that essentially loots you a card. So it's it's pretty
build your own smuggler's copter.
Yeah, pretty much. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of different ways to utilize Jayce. It protects itself, and the ultimate can get out of control.
Well, let's move on from the world of Planeswalkers to the world of flip cards. Number 9 on our list, we have Legion's Landing, which flips around into Adanto the First for it. So, Chaz, we talked about vampires maybe not quite being there. Where do you see this card fitting in Standard?
Yeah, there's a vampires list. This will certainly be a part of it. But the way I saw it was this certainly so well with Oketra's Monument. There's just so many ways to regurgitate these tokens out on the battlefield. And you don't need to connect with any of the tokens. You just need to attack. And then you have yourself a really serviceable... Well, you kind of like rampant growth yourself, and then you have a persistent 1/1 token for the rest of the game, and that kind of can drag the games out and kind of play this attrition just from your land. It's almost like a Kajorian outpost, and that saw some play way back when, many standards ago. So I think just Legion's Landing is a great 1-drop. You kind of have to look at it as a 1-mana 1/1. It actually doesn't matter if you have multiples of this particular flip land because it's legendary. It doesn't really matter because you're getting the value when you play the card that the other flip cards you can't, they don't offer that same value. So I think it's a very flexible card, and it works well in those monument lists.
Yeah, I think Monument is one obvious home. I'm also excited about this. I know Sam Black, for most of the last Standard, was messing around with these token lists with hidden stockpiles, anointed processions, where you go like super wide. It's almost like semi-aristocrat-y feeling, where you make all these tokens and you sack them to scry, and just everything goes crazy. And that deck was close to being good. It was good enough that Sam Black had success with it because he can win with all these crazy decks, but it would occasionally 5-0 league or something. And the big thing that deck lost, or one of the big things, was Thraben Inspector. And it feels like Legion's Landing, while I'm not going to say it's Thraben Inspector, which proved itself to be one of the best cards in Standard, but it feels like this could be the 1-drop replacement for that deck. It doubles your tokens, it curves into hidden stockpile, and the land part is super powerful, and even more powerful if you have an anointed procession or two on the battlefield. Things go super out of control. It helps you stabilize with the lifelink, just like chump blocking with the tokens, helps you stay alive while you're setting things up. So I'll be interested to see if that black-white hidden stockpile anointed procession list can maybe make a comeback with Legion's Landing being a key part of it.
I think so. It might not be the same deck list we saw. It could certainly evolve, but I'm eager to see that as well. That all seems like great interactions.
Well, let's move on to number 8 on our list. We have another white card, and I feel a little bad putting this on here. It's Settle the Wreckage, and I absolutely trashed this card when it was spoiled, but now that we've seen the whole set, I think it might end up being a little bit more important than we knew when it was first spoiled. So, Chaz, what's your take on Settle the Wreckage?
You definitely trashed on this card on the podcast. That is for sure. You have to look at cards in a context. This is looks a lot better when we talk about one of the other cards later in the list towards the top, because you need wrath effects. They're in removal is in short supply. When you lose so many cards in a format, you're kind of stuck with what you have, right? So we have to look at cards like Settle the Wreckage, Fumigate, Bantu's Last Reckoning as our sweepers. As much as you might not like that, it is kind of what we have, because as crazy as this sounds, Hour of Devastation might not cut it. With creatures with power 6 or greater might be ruling the format very soon.
Yeah, I think, so what happened with me with this card, when I first saw it, I was like, I don't want to wrap my opponent that much. I can't imagine playing this after Fumigate. But then 2 big things happen. First off, we have a certain huge hexproof dinosaur that we'll talk about in a minute that is apparently very good. If you've watched the presale prices on Carnage Tyra, it went from like $5 till now it's close to $30. It's just, I think it's the most hyped card in the set right now, honestly. And everyone who has played with it is saying, wow, this card is actually very strong. So that's one thing. The other thing is, we didn't really get a good or many good efficient replacements for Grasp of Darkness, as in ways to deal with Hazoret. So I think cards that deal with Carnage Tyrant and Hazoret, which are going to be 2 very popular cards right off the bat in Standard, are at a premium, and Settle the Wreckage does that when Fumigate doesn't. Bantu's Last Reckoning doesn't. Like, getting Indestructible Gods and huge hexproof things is a reason to play that, and while I still don't like ramping my opponent that much, if it's a choice between ramping my opponent and dying to Hazoret or dying to Carnage Tyrant, well, I think I'll take the not dying option if I have to choose.
Yeah, if I turn on my opponent's Ramunap Ruins over dying to Hazoret, I kind of just have to pick my poison at that point, because I'm certainly going to lose to Hazoret, and I will take the route of them having repeated usage of Ramunap Ruins. So this kind of seems like the aggressive take, where, you play Settle the Wreckage and maybe we're racing and, it doesn't matter if the lands are, you get many lands because I'm going to close out the game. Bantu's Last Reckoning is kind of the heavy control. I have more mana because it's so cheap to kind of reestablish my board presence, and Fumigate's a very kind of tap out, take care of everything. So a lot of these different cards are going to fill many different roles, and we're going to have to lean on these cards a lot, including Settle the Wreckage.
Well, let's move on to number 7 on our list. And our first dinosaur, Death Gorge Scavenger, which this card might be a bit underrated. I think when you look at it, it doesn't jump off the page as super powerful, but it's got so much text and does so many good things. What do you think of this one, Chaz?
Definitely underrated. The comparison to Kitchen Finks is actually growing on me, because it stabilizes you and then can pivot and go aggressive when you don't need to stabilize yourself anymore. But this is a key card. It's undercosted, has a pretty great body for its cost, and is going to save you many games in the Ramunap Red matchup, because you can just keep repeatedly gaining yourself life for not that large of a cost. And also keep in mind, it's not a +1/+1 counter, so the Winding Constrictor interaction doesn't really work there. So, but this is really great.
Yeah, so this card, the more I think about what it does, the more it seems amazing to me. So against Ramunap Red, like you mentioned, it's going to gain you 2 life right away, most likely, and likely gain you at least another 2, which puts you almost exactly in Kitchen Finks territory as far as life gain. So super sweet there. Also, it's just this weird natural graveyard hate where you can pick off a Settle the Wreckage, just going to get flashback with a Torrential Gearhulk. You can pick off a God Pharaoh's Gift target. So you can pick off a random Aftermath card, which we were talking about the format getting smaller. I think we'll see Cut to Ribbons and some of those decent Aftermath cards being more important to the format, just because there's not as many options that they're competing with. So in a lot of matchups, Death Gorge Scavenger actually does things you really want it to do. It might not be super great at any one thing. Like, it's not as big as I would like for my 3-drop. It's not as efficient, but it does so many little things that I think it's going to end up being relevant in a really wide range of matches in Standard.
Yeah, the incidental graveyard hate is... I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's true, and it's a come into battlefield ability, and it just needs to attack. So it doesn't really need to deal damage. You get the value right as you cast it, and it does pick off a lot of those cards, the flip cards, and anything else that could be flashback. I just think it's a very serviceable utility card, and it's going to show up in a lot of decks. And we keep talking about Ramunap Red, energy, stuff like that. It's going to be a very aggressive format I foresee early on, and those are really the gatekeeper of the format. Do you have a good enough game against Ramunap Red and these aggressive energy lists? And Death Gorge Scavenger definitely helps you stay in the game against those decks.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention potential dinosaur synergies. Like, if being a dinosaur does matter, it's technically something you can dump on the battlefield with Gishath or something if you're doing that. So, all around, I think Death Gorge Scavenger is going to sneak up on people and actually be a fairly heavily played card. Well, let's move on to number 6 on our list. We got another removal spell for Vraska's Contempt, sort of the Black Cast Out or a slightly more expensive Hero's Downfall. What's your take on this one, Chaz?
Again, it's the 2 life really kind of tacked on there. Our removal is very limited and exile is in short supply. It is instant. It does net you some life. So I think it's going to help shore up that removal for decks that can't utilize Settle the Wreckage or can't use Cast Out because those are both white. So I think this is just another removal spell that we'll have to lean on early on.
Yeah, I think it's super important to exile, as you mentioned, because I think the gods become even more important to this format. Like, while Hazoret was heavily played the whole time, some of the other gods were kind of just floating a little bit back, and now in a smaller card pool, we might see even more Ronuses, like, creeping up as being a better option. It's not competing with Tireless Tracker in the 3-drop slot, and having a way to just cleanly get rid of any god instant speed is a pretty big deal. And it's a nice way to get rid of a Planeswalker as well. So I think this card, it's not necessarily going to be a 4 of because it's a little bit too expensive, but I expect we'll see it in a lot of decks as like a 1 of, as a 2 of, because you're going to need ways to deal with these really hard to deal with threats. And like you said, if you're not in white, there's just not many options in the format. We don't have Grasp of Darkness anymore. So this kind of is the next best option that we have if you just got to kill anything at instant speed.
It's almost the only option at this point.
Yeah.
So, Vraska's Contempt, and again, it kind of keeps you in the game, and it deals with a lot of those threats that we talked about already, Seth, and it will nab a Planeswalker here and there. So it just kind of does it all for now.
Well, let's move on to our top 5. Number 5 on our list, we have another flip card, Vance's Blasting Cannons, which flips around into Spitfire Bastion. So the updated version of Outpost Siege, essentially. What's your take on this one, Chaz?
So Red didn't get a Shiv and Gorge this time around, Seth.
No, they actually got one of the better members of the cycle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I foresee a lot of decks adopting this card, maybe as a 1 of, and then sticking one in the sideboard. That kind of feels like where this will sit. It's a great value card that flips into a much better Shiv and Gorge. Like, it's actually really great that you Lightning Bolt. You don't need any like restrictions like Ramonette Ruins. You don't need a desert. It's just straight up 3 damage to a creature or player for 3, and that can kind of close out the gap. I mean, we talked about for a long time on the podcast that Red just did not have that extra reach. Well, Red got a lot of support in this set and already had a good base for support. So Red's going to be really strong, and Outpost Siege is a great effect on its own. It was played literally as just the front half. So if you get that added benefit of flipping into a land, then you can actually play your other flip card, the flip side, and just have it just kind of hang out there. So there's a lot of different things you can do with Vance's Blasting Cannons.
Yeah, we've already seen some very early results from like Magic League events and stuff, and Ramonette Bread, as expected, heavily played, and most of the best performing Ramonette Bread decks I've seen have moved 1 copy of Vance's Blasting Cannons into the main deck. Like, it's already there in a slot where maybe you would have seen a Chandra before, because even though Vance's Blasting Cannons in a vacuum isn't as powerful as Chandra, it is much harder to deal with. There's just not enchantment removal to any great extent in Standard. People are really focused, if you're going to fight a weird permanent type, it's mostly artifacts because of Kaladesh blocks. So there's a lot of artifact removal, but Vance's Blasting Cannons just sits out there and generates so much card advantage turn after turn after turn. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of red decks, the mono red decks, also some of the Teamer Energy decks. It's just a great card advantage engine where if you run into a control deck or even just a more mid-rangey, grindy deck with lots of removal, having Vance's Blasting Cannons out is going to be the difference a lot of times between you running out of action and your opponent gaining control of the game and you being able to keep up with the more card advantage heavy control and mid-range decks. Well, let's move on to number 4 on our list, and we're back to the world of dinosaurs. Out of all the tribes of Ixalan, dinosaurs I think is by far the most pushed. So up next we have Regisar Alpha, the 5-drop dinosaur. What do you think of this one, Chaz?
I think this is good just outside of dinosaurs. Like, it's a good card all around. We talked about these one-of cards. It's a 5-mana 4/4. You get a 3/3 when it comes into play. It has haste. So just on its own, it can really, it's a very formidable 5-drop in a realm of a lot of great 5-drops. I think it can hold its own. Keep in mind that it does compete against Glorybringer and Verdurous Gearhulk, so I don't know where this will fit immediately, but certainly in Dinosaurs, that's a certain. And maybe it can muscle its way in as a couple slots in other mid-range lists as well, because it does offer a lot of value right as you cast it.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting 7 power and toughness across 2 bodies for 5 mana, and some of it has haste and trample, which is a really good deal. Obviously, in Dinosaurs, it's really insane. It's on curve. When you play, like, Ripjaw Raptor into Carnage Tyra, and your Carnage Tyra has haste, I don't know how you deal with that. Like, there's not a lot of ways of stopping that, so it's really scary with the Dinosaur curve. And I think the interesting part is, we might see it in not full-on Dinosaur decks, but green-red monstery decks that have some dinosaurs. Like, if you're playing a deck that's kind of just green-red mid-range good stuff, but you're planning on using Carnage Tyrant as one of your main finishers, I can see a big argument for Regisaur Alpha over a Glorybringer, perhaps, because just giving your Carnage Tyrant haste is such a great ability. Like, it might make it better in certain builds of, like, green-red or Jund mid-range, while others that maybe aren't using Carnage Tyrant, maybe you're going to Vraska instead or something, then maybe in those builds you would stick with Glorybringer, but I think it has enough power because of the synergy with Dinosaurs that it can definitely show up in some lists.
Yeah, between this and the 2-drop, the name escapes me, Seth.
The Opic Huntmaster, the cost reduction one?
Giving your Dinosaurs haste is a big thing in Ixalan, especially when you're pairing it with Carnage Tyrant, because that is really scary. So between Regisaur Alpha and even the 1-2 brings out the Alpha and Carnage Tyrant a turn earlier, and Regisaur Alpha was great at 5, but even at 4, it's even better. So there's just so many different ways you can build around this card.
Well, let's move to the top 3 of our list. We have next up Ripjaw Raptor, more dinosaurs, and this one is it's just above the curve. It's not super exciting, but it's a card that's obviously just geared for constructed. It replaces itself. The body's good, just all around. Very strong card. Chaz, it's also green, so what's your take as the Green Master?
I'm very happy. This is just an elegant card, right? There's nothing crazy about it. It's just a huge creature with actually a really great ability on it in a format where a majority of the removal is going to be damage-based, and it will just get in the way of a lot of different cards and at the very least replace itself. Enrage is a great mechanic, especially on this. It's just so big. This is like Raminat Bread and the energy base lists. You're also going to have to game plan for Ripjaw Raptor. It's going to be one of the keepers of Standard very early on, maybe in the entire time until we see the second set of this block. Yeah, Ripjaw Raptor pretty much does it all, and it's going to be in a multitude of deck lists.
It might not sound like much, but that 1 extra point of toughness is so huge. It dodges Cut to Ribbons, it dodges Chandra, it dodges Glorybringer. So having 5 toughness, I think, is a really, really big deal, and it just makes it match up really well against a lot of what I would expect to be the best removal spells in the format. Yes, Vraska's Contempt's going to kill anything. You can't do anything about that. You could have 100 toughness, it wouldn't matter. Same with Cast Out, but as far as a lot of the removal that we'll see, Ripjaw Raptor just naturally lines up well with it, and then Rage ability is going to be awesome. Even beyond the ability to just block and draw a card, or if it trades off in combat, draw a card, stuff like Walking Ballista offers a ton of value. You can potentially just ping multiple times and have this weird, like, colorless divination almost in your dinosaur deck, your green-red dinosaur deck, thanks to Walking Ballista. So I think this card is going to be super strong. I expect it definitely to see play in dinosaur sets, but I think it definitely will also be just one of the best mid-range threats because of how well it lines up with the removal in the format.
If not the best. I mean, this all around is just incredible value. Like you said, there's just so many different ways to interact with Enrage on your own, and just you throw it in front of a creature. It may even kill the creature because it's so big. You get Enrage no matter what. This thing is just going to be a nightmare to deal with, and definitely you're going to have to game plan for it.
Well, let's move on. Speaking of a lot of value, we have number 2 on our list, Ruin Raider. We haven't talked too many pirates, but I think Ruin Raider is my favorite pirate of the set. Basically a kind of updated version of a Dark Confidant type effect. What's your take on this one, Chaz?
Yeah, I actually haven't seen many folks even talk about this card, Seth. Between you and I mean, you definitely love this card. I'm jumping on board with you on the pirate ship, but this just fills so many aggressive roles. Like, you don't even need to build pirates. Again, this is just one of those cards. It does have pirates on it. It does work well with pirates. But even in just like a black-red generic aggressive list, you play this, it's like one of the best. It's the best of the worst, I guess, Dark Confidant imitations we've seen. We've seen a lot of them. They've all been pretty mediocre, if not bad. This is something I can get behind because the 3-2 for 3 and the raid, you trigger the Dark Confidant ability right away, and you only just had to attack. You didn't even need to deal damage. So this is as close as we're going to get to Dark Confidant, I feel, and no one's really kind of talking about it.
Yeah, so this card I think is just very strong. The fact that you get the value the turn it comes into play is pretty huge. Obviously good if Pirates makes it as a tribe, because there are some sweet tribal synergies for Pirate, Admiral Beckett Brass, for example, but it could also just be a good aggro card. We were actually talking before we started recording this video about how red aggro decks could end up going towards black to get better 1-drops. The red decks didn't get a great replacement for Falcon Wrath Gorger leaving the format, so maybe you head towards black for something like Dread Wanderer, for example. And if you do go that direction, then you're definitely going to love Ruin Raider in your 3-drop slot as a steady source of card advantage. You're already attacking with all your creatures anyway. Your cards are cheap, so you're not taking that much damage. So I think there's definitely some possibilities there as well. I guess the big concern is if you're playing a more mid-rangey deck, you might struggle with Ruin Raider, especially if red is popular, because even just taking 4 damage, 3 or 4 damage, you flip a Ripjaw Raptor or something, that's a lot of life to lose. So I think you definitely have to be an aggressive deck to really take advantage of it, but in those decks, Ruin Raider can really shine. Well, let's move on to our number 1 card, very top of the list. We have another dinosaur, the Carnage Tyra, and this is another card that I kind of slept on. I saw a big dumb dinosaur. Yes, it has a lot of keywords. Yes, it's going to be miserable and limited, but the price has just kept going up and up, along with the hype on social media. I've seen so many people say Carnage Tyra is a real deal. I've played with this card. It is so strong. So Chaz, what do you think? Are you a believer in the Carnage Tyra?
Oh, I'm definitely a believer. It's a green mythics, and everyone's talking about it as like the Herald of Ixalan. This thing is really scary, and not just because it's a dinosaur, because of all the stuff that we talked about earlier on in this video. 6, it doesn't really blow you away. You're right. Like in terms of design, there's a lot of keywords. A lot of cards have done this in the past. You look at Gaia's Revenge, I think.
Gaia's Revenge.
Gaia's Revenge, stuff like that in the past. So you're like, okay, well, this is something that we've seen before, but not really. I mean, 6, that's a pretty undercosted price for a card like this. That's definitely not something we've seen before, and that can get even reduced. Some other the cards that play well with dinosaurs, the 1/2, like the Opetic Huntmaster, stuff like that, where this can suddenly be down on turn 5, maybe as early as turn 4, even with the 1-mana 0/3 cost reduction. We'll see how many that need to be played. And suddenly you can't do anything about this card. There's no great removal to deal with it. You can only Wrath to get rid of it. And it's going to end the game really quickly because it can't be chumped. It has trample. And I don't know, Seth. I mean, I've seen it. It's certainly something that I thought would be a gimmick, but it kind of happened even on the MTG Arena stream. If you play Samut the Tested and then Carnage Tyrant and you give this thing double strike, like, it is super crazy. It is really scary, and you're like, oh, that's never going to happen. It's a gimmick. And then suddenly it happens. You're like, I don't know what to do about this.
Yeah.
Like, I guess the game's over.
I think... Yeah, this card is it has crept up on me as being so good. I think whether or not it ends up being the most played card, that's certainly up for debate from Ixalan, I mean, because it is 6 mana. That's a lot for some decks. If you're playing aggro, you're not going to be able to play it. You got to be in green. But I think this card is going to have the biggest impact on the Ixalan standard format. Just by itself, I think it kills blue-red control, which was the premier control deck for the last few months. It wasn't really losing anything because Hour of Devastation can't kill it. So you almost, if you're going to play control, you essentially have to be playing sweepers. You got to be in black for Bantu's Last Reckoning. You got to be in white for Fumigate or Settle the Wreckage. So it single-handedly kills a tier deck just because of that. Like you said, you can ramp into it. It will be good in straight-up ramp decks. It's also pretty reasonable as a top end of a curve of a mid-range. If we see Jund or an Abzan-style deck that's just looking to play the best removal, the best creatures at every point on the curve, this is a great way to top it off. It's going to abyss away the opponent's board. It's super hard to block. It's usually going to take at least 2 creatures to actually trade with it in combat, and that's assuming you can't blow your opponent out with a removal spell, have a Samet like Chaz mentioned. So all around, this card is going to have a massive impact on Standard, and I'm pretty scared of it. It's just so hard to deal with. You can't counter it, you can't kill it with targeted removal, there's not good sacrifice effects, so the answers to Carnage Tyra right now are very, very minimal.
Yeah, very minimal. It's just scary on so many fronts. It's a scary looking dinosaur. And there's not, like you just said, there's really no great way to deal with it outside of those sweepers like we talked about. And you have to be in those colors. Red essentially can't do anything about this card. I think blue can I think there's a mass bounce spell, but I don't know if we might have actually lost it.
They reprinted one at 6 mana return. I forget the name of it, but there's one in Ixalan at 6 mana.
That's, so you're right. I mean, there's no way for some of these colors to deal with this card. It's kind of insane. And when it's cost reduction and it gains haste all in one card, like the Huntmaster, I mean, it's insane.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of our top 10 Ixalan cards for Standard. So, Chaz, any last thoughts on anything on the way out the door today?
I think this format's going to be really fun. A lot had to kind of go wrong and get made right in the journey to get to this point. But I think we're at a point now that folks are really going to start enjoying Standard again. I really loved what I seen from Ixalan on just so many different levels. And I think folks were just kind of a little tired of BFZ block and Shadows over Innistrad block, 2 blocks that were really strong and offered so many different cards that just overshadowed everything else in the format. And I just think it's a fresh, brand new start. It looks like they're reining back in the design. Not a lot of crazy stuff is going on. And I think folks, we're in for a really great set of standards between Ixalan and beyond.
I agree. I feel like we are definitely over the hump. We see a lot of cards we didn't talk about because they're not obvious Standard staples in the way of Carnage Tyra and some of the other cards, but we see the Pithing Needle return. We see cheap removal return. We saw a lot of the things that we were missing when Standard was at such a low point, maybe 6 or 9 months ago. Those things are back in the format now. So even beyond these top 10 cards, which I expect we'll see at the tournament tables on the top level, there's so much stuff for your sideboard and these little utility spells that we just haven't had for a long time. Like Spell Pierce is all the way back to Zendikar. Duress has been quite a while. So it's really awesome. And I think this is just a really good Magic set. It's not strong in the sense where it's broken and pushed over the top, but I don't think that's where you want it to be. It seems like a well-rounded set. Lots of good cards across rarities, good rares, good uncommon. So overall, I'm super excited for Standard moving forward too.
Yeah, so land ho, ye scallywags. There's a lot of treasure over the horizon. Yeah, that was horrible. I don't really deserve it, but yeah, I tried.
So we're actually recording this on pre-release weekend. So I got to ask you, Chaz, you mentioned going to Two-Headed Giant pre-release. Are you dressing up as a pirate?
Maybe. You know what? Maybe. Or I think I might have to dig up one of those, like those Barney, I know there's some Barney helmets out there. Maybe I don't know. We'll have to see if I can find one. That would be pretty interesting too. But yeah, really hope everyone enjoys the pre-release. It already looks like folks are having a great time on social media as if we're recording this. So really happy that folks are taking a liking to Ixalan because I think it's a great set. Like you said, it has a lot of different things for everyone, and it's not a super overpowered set. And you're right. That's kind of not what we wanted.
Well, I think that wraps up our top 10 Ixalan cards for Standard. So big thanks to everyone for watching. Chaz, thanks to you for hanging out. It's always fun to do these videos.
Yeah, absolutely. I always look forward to these videos, Seth. Thanks to everyone who listened. Thanks, Seth, for having me on. It was awesome.
And I guess that wraps it up. So until Rivals of Ixalan, we will talk to you soon.
Yep, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.